Electricity is an energy source, but it is also a financial asset, a commodity whose global value is in trillions. Welcome to watch the sustainability trends in business. This time we will talk about electricity market. Buying electricity is simple for a consumer, even though sometimes finding the most affordable solution may require some thinking. But this is only a tip of an iceberg because the whole market is much more complex and even not very predictable. The examples used in this episode are from Finland, but they are similar to other European markets and also to many other markets throughout the world. But there are local differences. Important features of electricity. Maybe the most important thing to understand is that the production and consumption has to meet each other every second. There is no such thing as storage in the electrical grid. It has to be built separately if someone wants to have storage. Production is more and more weather dependent because we have more and more wind and solar. But also the consumption is weather dependent. When it's cold, there is more consumption due to heating. When it's very hot, there is more consumption due to air conditioning, for example. And then the electrical grid is sensitive to failures in connections between different areas. Failure in a transmission link may cause large trouble somewhere. And also, largest power plants are so large that their failures have significant impact on the grid. Due to all these features, electricity is traded on very different timescales. In the long end of time span, there are purchase price agreements, PPAs, which are agreements of selling and buying electricity, and they may cover 10 years. There are different types of PPAs. There are so-called baseload PPAs, which are the traditional form of PPAs. And essentially, when I buy a baseload PPA, what I say is that I will use, for example, 1 megawatt from this for the next 10 years. How much will it cost? And that is, of course, quite fine with, for example, fossil fuels, but quite difficult with wind. Of course, a wind farm owner can sell baseload PPA, but that means that there is high risk. So if the farm production is not enough to cover what has been sold through the PPA, the farm owner needs to get the surplus from somewhere else, and that's usually quite expensive. The PPAs can be shaped which means that, for example, you can buy electricity for daytime or weekdays daytime electricity. And of course that might make sense from the buyer's point of view, and that's quite predictable also from the producer's point of view. And with solar, that might even make a lot of sense with renewables. In the other end of spectrum, there are pay-as-produced PPAs, and the idea is that the price is fixed in the PPA, but the amount of electricity really depends on production. So, for example, a wind farm owner does not need to buy any surplus anywhere. If there is no production, they just won't sell anything. And of course, this is quite riskless for the producer, but it is very much lower value for the buyer, because then the buyer needs to buy the extra from somewhere. So the risk will be priced. Well, PPAs are for several years. Then there are futures and forwards, other derivatives. The idea is that you can buy electricity for example, next February, base load. So if you have a factory that uses 1 megawatt of power, then you'll buy a little bit less than 7 megawatt hours of base load futures for next February, and this way you have hedged yourself against any price fluctuations. These futures and forwards are traded in the commodities market. There are several marketplaces, And this is an example, the EEX. And as you can see, there are a lot of products. You can trade monthly futures for the next 6 months, quarterly futures for maybe 2 years, or yearly futures. So you can actually buy electricity for the full year of 2030 for the Finnish price area. You can buy the futures just to have fun in commodity trading, or then to hedge your own costs if you're using a lot of electricity, and both types of buyers are there. And of course they can be sold, they're just, you know, a paper. Long-term markets are commodities markets, they're quite far away from technology. Then we have the spot market, which is much closer to power plants and your users. In Europe, most Western and Northern and Central Europe countries, not Southwest Europe countries, are participating in the Nord Pool exchange, and they trade in the Nord Pool. So Nord Pool takes care of day ahead and intraday markets. Day ahead markets are auctions. The idea is that before noon Central European time, different players in the market tell what they are willing to buy or sell and at what price. And then the auction is closed at noon for the next day, that is from midnight to the next midnight. And then the price is formed for every hour of the next day. And this will actually change in 2025 to be in 15-minute periods. So if you know that you will need 10 megawatt hours of electricity tomorrow between 1 and 2 o'clock in the afternoon, you can buy it from Nord Pool day ahead market. This day ahead, also called the spot market, is very important because it's available to all electricity users. So it's also available to private consumers who can use it to optimize their consumption. Here you can see an example of next day's prices from Nord Pool's page. By the way, if you need to have this data in numerical form through an API, if you wanted to have it from Nord Pool, you either pay a lot or resort to dirty tricks which are against the license. So don't do it, but please have a look at ENSO-E here. ENSO-E is a transparency platform, and it has a lot of open data regarding the spot prices and other things such as production methods. Day ahead market is a guessing game, because if the weather is different from what was expected, there may be more demand, or if there is no wind, there will be much less production, for example. And there might be unpleasant surprises in the grid, for example, a nuclear power plant going down or an interconnect between different countries going down. And these may change the situation very much from what was expected when the prices were settled. And to answer these needs, there is something fast called the intraday market, which is what it says on the label. It's a market that happens within the day. It works differently in different geographic areas, but in Finland it is a 15-minute market, and the market closes at the beginning of a period, which means that up to the last moment you can still sell and buy electricity for a certain period of time. Price fluctuations are, as can be expected, quite significant, especially when something interesting happens, but participation is more challenging. It's not for private users, certainly, at least not directly, and unfortunately it's not for the poor. The Nord Pool data API for getting the data from the market costs about 30,000 euros a year. As consumption and supply need to be kept in balance every second, not only every 15 minutes, there are even faster markets available. These faster markets are maintained by the local grid operators. So in Finland that will be Fingrid, and they are not international markets. They are called reserve markets. And the time scale there is from a single second to that 15 minutes. Here it is possible to participate in the market if you happen to have a fast power plant in reserve, or if you can reduce the consumption on demand, so if you have an industrial process which can be run down very fast. Also, batteries, so energy storage, is an option in these markets, and that's becoming more and more interesting and important. And here the price does not depend on the number of megawatt hours, but instead it depends on the existence of the reserves. That is, if you offer 1 megawatt of reserve capacity for a certain hour or certain period of time, you will get paid for the amount of potential reserve you offer, not how much it's used. These markets are interesting for many players, and that can go down to domestic things. For example, domestic heating, be it heat pumps or direct electric heating, domestic water heating, and all those things, they can be shut down if there is a need. For 15 minutes nothing happens in any of these cases, which means that there is actually a huge reserve available. Electric vehicle batteries are another possibility, and in the future you can connect the electric vehicles to the grid through V2G technologies, which means that the batteries can actually supply energy into the grid. There are a lot of interesting opportunities. A private citizen or a private consumer cannot be a direct customer or direct provider of reserve capacity to FinGrid, but there will be intermediate players. If you're interested in these markets, in the reserve market, FinGrid has a lot more information on these, and great news, FinGrid data is mostly open data. So, electricity is traded on different markets: EEX, Nord Pool, FinGrid, and so on. There are a lot of products, and even consumers actually participate with their electricity contracts regardless if they want it or not, because if you take a spot price contract, then of course it's directly in the market, and if you take a fixed price contract, then you are participating with futures, because these contracts are hedged with futures. A significant amount of electricity is traded outside of any of these markets. They are traded through one-to-one agreements, in which case, of course, it doesn't go through Nord Pool or EEX or anything. A sort of guesstimate is that 75% of electricity goes through Nord Pool, so it is still the majority. But the same electricity may change hands several times through its journey, so it may be in futures, it may be in shorter futures, and then even shorter, and then it's in the day-ahead market, and then it can be even in the intraday market. So it's sort of like a financial marketplace. In this complexity, let's have a deeper look into the day-ahead market. The idea in the day-ahead auction every day is that all participants give their bids. And these bids could be, for example, I will buy 10 megawatt hours of electricity in Finland tomorrow between 10 and 11 a.m. for a price which must not exceed 100 euros per megawatt hour. And then of course the sellers do the same. They may say that I will sell 100 megawatt hours of electricity tomorrow between 5 and 6 in the evening for a price which must be at least 60 euros per megawatt hour. These sellers may be power plant owners, but they may also be someone who has otherwise bought electricity, sort of promises for getting electricity and then they're releasing or selling them. Once all of these bids are in, the supply and demand curves are formed, and the final price will be at the intersection. Well, if that sounds complicated, this is an example of the Economics 101 demand and supply curve. Just in case that is not in good memory, this is a very simple example. The more you are prepared to pay for something, the more there are those who will sell. So the supply, of course, is larger if you pay more. And vice versa. The less you ask for your product which you're selling, the more there are those who will buy. When these curves cross, we know the volume and price. Easy and beautiful. Well, at least in the Economics 101 course. the reality is not that beautiful, I'd say. Let's see what happens in the day ahead market, and this is Nord Pool FI. This data covers 4 days, and there is one curve shown for each hour. Blue is demand and red is supply. Dashed line shows the settled price, and then of course the vertical dashed line shows the volume. You may notice that both the supply and demand live, they change. The price is quite low most of the time and quite stable, but then it jumps violently at certain points. Why is this? Well, let's first take a look at a low priced hour. And let's zoom into the crossing. You can notice that both the supply and the demand curves are almost horizontal. So even a large difference like 1000 megawatts does not change the price significantly. However, if we go to an expensive hour, like this one here with over 250 euros per megawatt hour, and zoom in, the intersection looks completely different. The curves are almost vertical, which means that very small differences in supply or demand result in huge differences in price. So when it's expensive, it's also very fluctuating. So our simplistic theoretical example had nice straight curves, straight lines. If we draw all supply curves in the same picture, during that 4-day period, 96 curves, they look virtually the same. The shape is the same, they are just at different horizontal positions. Why is this? What makes the shape of the supply curve? Well, there is nuclear, wind and solar, which have very small variable cost, which are essentially always run at full power because of the small variable cost. So they are offered with essentially zero price, because anytime the price is positive, it's beneficial to sell it. That makes the flat area. Then we have about 1000 megawatts, during which the price rises from 0 to 30 euros per megawatt hour, and most probably this is largely hydroelectric power. The power plant owners are trying to optimize their income and their reservoir state. And then we move into thermal power plants, and at about 120 euros per megawatt hour natural gas kicks in. Above that there is very, very little to add, because everything is in use, which makes the curve almost vertical. Some flexibility comes from the fact that someone may decide to run down industrial processes if the price is too high, and if they have already secured electricity for that time by, for example, using PPAs or one-to-one trade. Just to understand the magnitude of the weather-dependent production, wind power is about 6,000 megawatts in Finland, so it really makes a huge difference whether it's windy or not, and it's quite concentrated in small geographic area. We can also look at the demand curves the same way. Demand could be more flexible, as processes can be run down, consumers may decide to heat less or not to take a sauna, and so on. And this is especially true within a few hours, as heating can be usually switched off for a couple of hours. But no, the distance between 0 and hundreds of euros per megawatt hour is only a couple of hundred megawatts. There is very little flexibility. Of course, the basic demand depends on day of week, time of year, temperature and so on, but the curve shape is almost the same all the time. It just moves horizontally. Why is this? What makes the demand curve so steep? There are probably two significant drivers. First of all, very large part of consumption is actually with fixed contracts. Their consumption doesn't depend on the grid state. They just want to get the electricity whatever the spot price is. That fixed contract can of course be the fixed contract for a consumer, or it can be something that is hedged with futures. And second reason is that for many users the electricity price is so low that it's not worth it trying to optimize it even when using spot pricing. And this has created a situation where the demand is highly inflexible and price fluctuations are large. This curve shows the day-ahead spot price fluctuations during the last year. They are very, very significant. We'll talk later more about this. So the market is not stable. It is almost broken, I'd say, even though the average price has been quite low. And even worse, there are no easy ways to fix the market. All options have significant downside. One possibility could be to set a lower upper limit for the price. Now the upper limit is at 4,000 euros per megawatt hour. The upper limit could be 1,000 euros per megawatt hour without significant impact on anything, but that wouldn't help much, would it? Of course, you could set the limit lower, for example 500 euros per megawatt hour, but that could lead to shortage of electricity, and then shortage really means that then you don't get anything from the wall plug. Another possibility is that forwards and futures are part of the problem as they fix the price too early before. So banning forwards and futures would probably help with the price fluctuations somewhat by making the demand curve less steep, but of course that would be quite against market economy, and there are so many ways of structuring these instruments that it would also essentially ban hedging, and hedging is important for many investments, so then we wouldn't have investments. On the other hand, one thing that could be done is that the price could be let to go high up to 4,000 euros per megawatt hour, but then we would cut the windfalls for some useful use. Windfall here means that very high prices give excessive profits to low variable cost actors. For example, if you have a hydroelectric power plant which was constructed in 1930s, you would become extremely rich by these high prices. And this is something that has been tried, but unfortunately creating a fair windfall cutting method is very, very difficult. There is actually some legislation even in Finland about that, and it was made during this energy crisis in 2022, but it wasn't very useful and it didn't work as expected. Well, then we could also say that electricity is in many cases, especially hydroelectric, a natural monopoly, which means that the whole infrastructure should be state-owned. That way it could be developed into an optimal combination. And this works if you happen to believe in Piatiletkas, that is the 5-year plans. Otherwise it is quite far from market economy. Finally, probably the best solution is to have a robust and strongly interconnected international grid with a lot of production from different geographic areas, plus a lot of different storages as well. And this sounds nice, extremely nice, but in reality getting there will take decades. So for the time being we are stuck with a very fluctuating electricity price, and it is not going to be fixed anytime soon. But these prices are not only a bad thing. First of all, low price at the moment reflects low emissions, which means that these fluctuations direct energy consumption to low emission periods of time. And also, these price fluctuations offer a great incentive for businesses that can create demand flexibility and possibly supply flexibility as well, and storage. In the next episode, we will have a closer look at the electricity price and what may be done in the future. Thank you for watching. See you next time.